And here we go. We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be normal.
R68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roger, planet.
Water towers fly! Yes! Echo down to nominal.
Flight downside FD off. Bring in FD off. It's orange!
145! Oh my god!
Decollage.
What is it?
Put that in the big bag, Eagle.
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
If the methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?
Yikes. You good? Sure. We don't need any more of these.
Through Artemis, which you're going to hear a little bit about tonight. And then, of course, we have the Space Shuttle Enterprise on top of that exhibit, too. And then later on tonight, we are going to have our movie night as well. We're showing First Man up on the flight deck. So you came on a really, really good day, guys. So we are also thrilled to have you all here for this special broadcast of Astro Live. If you're not familiar with that, this is something we do every month. It is streamed all across the internet on our social media channels and also with the help of nasaspaceflight.com. And we interview scientists and engineers and really amazing people doing stuff all across the space sector. And of course, we love to have some here on site too, which is part of our wonderful astronomy night. So this month, we are so thrilled to be welcoming to the stage Artemis Launch Director Charlie Blackwell-Thompson here in conversation with former NASA astronaut Mike Massimino. So come on up to the stage, you two. And I'll give a little bit of an introduction too for Charlie, so you can get to know her a little bit more. A bit about Charlie. Based at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida, she serves as NASA's first female launch director. Love the round of applause for that, yep. She oversees the countdown and liftoff of NASA's SLS rocket and Orion spacecraft for the Artemis missions. And on November 16th, 2022, she led her team during the very first launch of Artemis. Did anyone happen to see that on the internet maybe? Or in person? Oh, it was so exciting, right? Her role includes leading and managing the launch operations planning and execution for the Exploration Ground Systems Program and Exploration Systems Development Division. And in her role as launch director, she manages the development of all launch countdown plans, philosophy, launch and scrub turnaround procedures and schedules, as well as training approaches. She's now preparing for Artemis II, the first crewed Artemis mission. So everyone put your hands together for Charlie Blackwell-Thompson and Mike Massimino.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. Charlie, thank you for making the trip here. I know you're busy. It's great to have you here. You have a video that you wanted to start us off with? So we'll watch the video first. Go ahead.
Yeah, that sounds great. I brought a video that has a little bit of footage from our Artemis launch, and it is what I call my launch director video. So we could go ahead and start it whenever you're ready.
Safety officer.
The EGS CSO verifies the SLS Orion and EGS CSOs have no constraint and are go for launch.
Range weather. Weather has no constraints and weather is go for launch.
And mission manager, launch director.
Launch director, mission manager on 232. The mission management team has been pulled. You have a go to proceed with terminal count and launch of Artemis I.
On behalf of all the men and women across our great nation who have worked to bring this hardware together to make this day possible, and for the Artemis generation, this is for you. At this time, I give you a go to resume count and launch Artemis I.
And here we go.
T-minus 10, 9, 8,
Sound suppression water.
7, 6, 5, 4,
stage engine start.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff.
We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the first stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour.
That's pretty cool. So we're going to try to cover a bunch of stuff here, but I thought we would start with your beginning of how did you get involved? That was you right there, giving everyone the well wishes in the firing room in charge. But a lot happened to get you there. What first? We got a lot of young people here. What first inspired you when you were, a kid, to get involved with all this stuff? What was it that happened to you?
Well, I would say the very beginning probably started with my mom, because my mom believed that I could do anything, and she told me that. And so it was always like, you can do whatever you want to do. So when I look at the young people in the audience, I want to tell you the same thing, right? You can do anything, right? I am a living testament to that. But how I got interested in engineering was an incredible teacher. And it was my physics teacher in high school, and it was in a time period where there weren't a lot of women in engineering, but that incredible physics teacher, when I was in the 11th grade, said, what are you going to do when you go to school? What are you going to do when you go away to college? And I didn't really know. And so I said, I'm not sure. And he said, well, have you ever thought about studying engineering? And I asked him, I said, well, what would I do with an engineering degree? And I was expecting him to tell me, this very specific, this is what an engineer does. And instead he said, well, what couldn't you do? Which wasn't terribly helpful at the time. But he was absolutely 100% right. What couldn't you do? And so that engineering degree, when I went off to school, that's what I decided to study, because my physics teacher encouraged me to think about that, and I didn't have a better answer, so I figured, well, why not? And so that's where I started. I ended up getting my engineering degree and ended up with an interview at Kennedy Space Center.
And so you grew up in South Carolina. Clemson is where you went to college, and aerospace engineering. No, computer engineering.
Computer engineering.
So were you interested in space at that time, or was it more just you loved computers, or how did that unfold? So
I was always interested in space. I mean, I remember. You may remember this as well, Mike. I don't know.
I'm much older. I'll remember everything.
But when I tell this story, sometimes I look out. I know folks are thinking, "What is she talking about?" But when I was in grade school, when something big happened, they wheeled in the TV on the cart, right?
Yep. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I remember being in the first grade, and they brought the TV in on the cart, and it was the end of the Apollo program. It was those last few missions of us landing on the moon. And I just remember being so intrigued by that and so curious about it. So I was always interested in space, but I really didn't know how to connect from where I was to working in the space industry. So the computer engineering came about because, again, it was a sign of the times. I remember when we got our first computer in my high school, and I thought, wow, computers seem to be the thing of the future. I'm going to study engineering. I'm going to pick computer engineering, and that's where I stayed.
And then once you when you graduated, how did you make that connection from computer engineering at Clemson to NASA?
Well, I feel like I got really lucky. So I was looking for a job, my senior year, and one of the contractors that was at Kennedy came and was interviewing, and one of the things that I was really interested in was testing software. I thought, I don't want to write software. I knew that wasn't for me, but I thought, testing software would be pretty cool. And so I went on that interview, and it was actually testing software that would be in the control center. It was testing software that would fly on board the shuttle for payloads or for spacecraft. Yeah. And, I can still remember walking into the firing room. So I did my interview. I guess I did okay. They brought me to a plant trip, and I came to Kennedy Space Center. And I remember walking into the firing room the first time, firing room 1, which is where we launched Artemis I from. And sometimes I still feel like that 22-year-old that walked in that firing room. But I walked in that room, and the team had headsets on. They were getting Space Shuttle Discovery ready to go fly for return to flight after Challenger. And I had no idea what they were talking about, because at NASA we talk in call signs and we talk in acronyms. But the thing that I knew in that moment with certainty was, how do I get a seat in this room? How can I become a part of this team?
So that was the moment.
That was the moment.
Okay. So then you went to the Kennedy Space Center. You didn't start out right away in that room, though. Is that true?
That's true.
What was your first job at NASA? What were you working on?
So my first job was I was testing software for payloads that would fly on board the shuttle, and so I worked in the operations and checkout building over in the industrial area. And so when we would have spacecraft that were going to fly, we would do a checkout of the software with the ground software, and so that's kind of where I started. Working on payloads, and I did that for a number of years. Got to work on some incredible things. I worked on the International Space Station. I worked on the Hubble Space Telescope and the servicing missions. And then eventually I changed and went over and worked in the NASA Test Director office on the shuttle program.
Okay. And the payloads you worked on, were they all shuttle payloads? Or
They were all.
Okay, so you mentioned Hubble, ISS, part of that too?
Yes, Node 1.
Okay, so really cool things going into space. You worked on putting them there. And then how did you make that transition to the firing room? Is that something you always had your eye on? Is that you apply to that? How does that all work? Is that
Well, payloads are actually in the firing room for launch.
Okay.
For the shuttle payloads.
All right, cool.
And so the first time that I sat in that room was STS-32.
Okay.
So it's been a lot of years.
Yeah.
And
was that the return to flight, or that was?
No.
No, it was 26.
26.
Okay, gotcha.
So it was
after
a
that.
bit after that.
Okay.
But yeah, I was able to sit in there for my first payload. There wasn't a whole lot for that particular payload in Launch Countdown. It was mostly tested prior to that. But over the years, I was in the firing room many times for different missions. But so how did I make the transition was I'd been working in avionics systems and electrical integration for spacecraft, which I thought was the greatest job in the whole world, putting stuff together, testing it out, putting it in the space shuttle, testing it out.
Yeah.
And then somewhere around after the Columbia accident, I thought, maybe I want to try something different. I've been doing this same kind of work, and I loved it, absolutely loved it, thought I had the greatest job in the whole world. But I had an opportunity to go into the test director office, and that was, avionics systems, I would say it was narrow but very deep, and the test directors, you look across many different disciplines, and you integrate the work, and you kind of work for the launch director for the shuttle missions. And so I made that transition over to the NASA Test Director office in the early 2000s.
Okay. And then you worked as a NASA Test Director. And describe that job, because that's when I got to know you, right?
Yes.
So describe that job. To what did that entail? What were you doing with being a NASA Test Director?
So the NASA Test Director is responsible for integrating they have they work for the launch director, and they're responsible for integrating the work in a space shuttle countdown. And so you hear their voice quite a bit, and you'll hear them, as they kick off different steps in the countdown. One of my favorite parts of being a shuttle NTD was when we would do the voice checks with the crew, which I know I got to do with you when you flew them 125, and then it really is an orchestration of the entire the work that gets you to launch.
Yeah. We do at a big dress rehearsal, TCDT, which is terminal countdown test. About a month.
Yep.
That's about a month before.
Yes.
Where we go down, the crew goes down to the Kennedy Space Center, and it's a dress rehearsal. It's you'll sleep in the same room you're going to be in. You have breakfast in the room that you're going to have breakfast in. Then everyone goes to the suit room. You do the walkout. You go down the elevator. You wave. You do all that stuff. You go out to the launch pad. You get inside the vehicle, and then we start talking to Charlie. So so I'm just sitting, and then you do that the whole rehearsal, and then it's kind of cool. But then you come back about a month later for launch.
For the real thing.
And it's a different atmosphere. So now you're lucky you did that little dress rehearsal, even just going out to the launch pad and doing all that, because now you're laying on. So why don't we kind of contrast what's going on launch morning? Now we're not messing around. There's fuel inside the rocket, right? So we're out on the launch pad, kind of looking up, at some procedures that might be there, playing rock, paper, scissors with your friend. That was on the mid-deck, stuff like that. But kind of waiting for this huge event to happen. But really, and talking to you, right, we're hearing your voice, doing our comm checks, but really, you have our lives in your hands at that point, right? So we're like, okay, our good friend Charlie's going to make sure everything is going to be okay. What's it like for you? What's it like on a launch day, right there, that launch morning? What's that like? As we're sitting out on the launch pad, what's going on in the firing room?
Yeah, so it's never lost on you as a test director or as a launch director that you're responsible for the crew. And it's the crew that's going to go fly the mission. It's the astronauts. It's the closeout crew that goes out to, once the crew is strapped in, that they close out the spacecraft, or in the case of the shuttle, they close out the shuttle, make sure that everything is configured for launch. So it's never lost on you that you're responsible for them. In terms of the firing room, the firing room changes over the course of the countdown. So for shuttle, the countdown was actually 3 days long. Most folks think about it as being that last, 20 minutes or so. But it was 3 days long. It changes over the course of those 3 days. When you get to tanking, the room gets pretty quiet, but it's still conversational, because people are moving around. But when you get down to that last hold, which for shuttle was T-9, it's really quiet in the firing room, and the team is really focused, because the team is monitoring their systems, making sure that their systems are ready to go fly, and that vehicle is safe to go fly the crew. And so that's kind of what it's like in the room. I mean, there's an intensity to it, an excitement to it.
We were talking earlier about how time seems to slow down for you, in those moments, and kind of for us too on the launch pad, you're kind of just waiting to see what the outcome is going to be of what's about to happen, and that was for you as well, just totally intensely looking at everything with a huge responsibility to give us the green light if we're going to go anywhere. But you have to, eventually, you don't have to go, but the idea is to go. You have to take that risk and make sure you feel comfortable about it, right? But
we absolutely have to make sure that we are safe to launch and that we're safe to fly.
Yeah. All right, so that was the shuttle, the launch that we worked together, and then you went on to continue with the shuttle program through the end of it. What was it like you were talking about toward the end of the shuttle? Some of your memories, or just some of your fond memories, besides launching us into space, but of the shuttle program and when that ended. Share with us some of that.
Well, you know, the shuttle program was a really special program. I mean, 30 years it was in existence, and it saw the deployment of spacecraft that went to other planets. It saw the building of the International Space Station, the deploy of the Hubble mission, and then the servicing missions that followed. So, I mean, what an amazing vehicle and what an amazing suite of missions the space shuttle had. And as we got to the end of the program, you know, one of the things that I wanted, and I didn't do it as well as I would have liked, but I tried to be intentional about appreciating the moment that I was in, because we knew there was only going to be, you know, a handful of missions left. And so each of those missions, each of those launches at the end of the program were extremely special, because you knew you were getting, you know, it was the last of. And I'll never forget, in the job I was in at the end of the program, you were in the firing room for launch, and you were on the runway for landing. And I can still remember when STS-135, final space shuttle mission, was going to land at Kennedy Space Center, and we were out on the runway, and I can remember, you know, you can hear the calls over the air to grounds, and I can remember one that sticks with me to this day. And I mean, you know, it's been 2011, right, when the space shuttle program ended, and I can remember the call. The runway is in sight, and I knew she's coming home, and this is the last time. And usually, you know, shuttle lands, we go through safing, downgrade, crew comes off, and you'll do a walk around the vehicle, and then you're, you know, like, oh, I got all this stuff to do back in the office, I better, you know, get on back and get going. And I remember on that last landing, I couldn't quite leave, and so I stayed. And we got through all of the, you know, the crew came off, they made their remarks, they departed. We got ready to tow her back to the orbiter processing facility, or the OPF. And I was still hanging around, and I kept thinking, yeah, I really ought to, you know, I probably ought to get back to the office, but I really wanted to take that in. I wanted to be in that moment and be present and remember it forever. And because I knew that we were at the end of an era, and it was the last time I would get to do that. And so I walked back with Atlantis all the way to the OPF. It was summer, it was hot, and but it was just wonderful to walk along with her, and every now and then kind of duck under the wing for some shade, and just think about the missions that she had flown and the accomplishments of the program. And it was a really bittersweet moment for me.
Yeah, so it was maybe gratitude that it was successful, but a little sadness that I felt kind of sad too. I'm sad right now with this. No, I mean, it was really, I got chills when you were talking about it. It was a wonderful description. And that's maybe the best description of that moment I've ever heard, because I think all of us involved felt that you know, you're glad the crew is back and all that, but it was the end of an era. It really was. And it was, I think there was a sadness to it. We're lucky we have one of those spaceships here, right? We have an Enterprise here. The Enterprise never made it to space, but it's here, and we're lucky to have one here in New York City, so I can go and look at it every once in a while and remember. So that's very cool. All right. But there's always that next thing, folks. You know, there's always something else to do. There's always going to be something. And the shuttle program ended, but then Artemis started. So you're obviously hugely involved directly with that. And tell us a little bit about what Artemis means to you. What's the program like? How did we make that transition? Tell us about what that program is now, going back to the moon.
Yeah, so Artemis is actually named after the twin sister of Apollo. So when we went to the moon the first time, over 50 years ago, we went under the banner of Apollo. And now we're going back. We're going back to the surface of the moon, and we're going under the Artemis program. but we're doing it in a different way. You know, during Apollo, we flew a set of missions, and then we moved on. And so the idea behind Artemis is to develop a capability and to build upon that capability. And so it's about a sustainable presence on the moon. It's using the moon as a proving ground, as a place to learn how to be away from your home planet so that one day we can go on to Mars.
So it's a big rocket.
Oh, it's a big rocket, yeah.
It's the biggest one ever built. Is that a true statement?
Yes.
Huge. And so your involvement with it, when did you start working on the program? Was it right at the beginning, or when did you get involved with it?
So I've been working, after the space shuttle program ended, I did a couple of different jobs within NASA, and then I heard that there was this rocket and they needed some help starting to put their countdown together. And so they wanted someone that had some launch experience, and so I kind of raised my hand and said, hey, I'd be willing to help with that. And so it started that way, and that must have been in like the 2013 kind of time frame, maybe 14, and it just kind of built from there. But the more, you know, I am drawn to the hardware. I love the hardware, and so the idea of getting to put the plans together for this new rocket for a launch, working with a new team, helping to build that team, I thought, wow, you know, every job I've had I thought was the greatest job ever. And this one I was like, wow, that's another one of those greatest jobs ever. Like, how do you not go do that?
Yeah, just keeps coming. So with this one now, you were the NASA test director for
the launch director.
For a shuttle, you were NASA test director.
Correct.
But now you're the NASA launch director.
Correct.
So now you are the person who is responsible for the control team, and tell us about what your job is now. How is it?
Well, the launch director is in charge of the launch team and in charge of the now, the launch director doesn't do this by herself, right? The launch director has an incredible team, and each of the team members has a huge responsibility. I depend on them to make sure that that rocket is configured, that they know their system, that they're monitoring their system for readiness, that they're committing it to go fly. But my job is to kind of manage all of the preparations for launch, the plans, the timelines, the overall management of that. And then on launch day, it is you're responsible for the execution of the countdown itself.
So you put together going over what the plan is going to be. We're going to be ready, polling the room and all of that. And you worked that for a few years. The rocket showed up at the Kennedy Space Center a few years ago. And then for Artemis I, that was your job. So once that, you were doing sims, I imagine, before that rocket showed up, and then that big rocket we just saw a picture of behind you there. Then it's but I guess we're seeing the firing room. What do we? Is that the firing room, real quick?
That is. That's the firing room right there.
All right. So there you go. There you are, right behind through those windows.
That's launch night right there. That's
cool.
launch night.
That's launch night.
Yep.
Okay. So take us up a little bit up to launch night. And then we'll talk about launch night. So, because it didn't happen right away, right? You had a few attempts. You want to make sure things are right.
Yep.
There's no, well, if it goes badly, we'll come. No, it has to go. It has to work, right? The future of the space program is riding on it. It's not too much pressure, but that's kind of what you're looking at, right? So, take us through that build up, and then to that day.
So the rocket comes to Kennedy Space Center as elements, and so when you see the picture up behind me, you have the solid rocket boosters on the side, you have the core stage in the middle, you have the upper stage above that, and then you have the Orion spacecraft up on the very top. And so that rocket is assembled and tested at Kennedy Space Center in the Vehicle Assembly Building, or the VAB. And so as we're putting that together and we're testing it out, making sure that it's ready to roll the pad, because a little bit different from shuttle, when we roll to the pad, we expect to only be there about 10 to 12 days. So we used to be at shuttle, we'd be at the pad for about a month, a 28-day pad flow.
Okay.
So we roll to the pad when we're ready to go launch. So most of the testing is done in the VAB. And one of the coolest things that I would share with you is the first time we roll that rocket out, the launch director is responsible for that operation as well. And, you know, I'd seen that vehicle in the vehicle assembly building, but it's got platforms around it. I've seen it hundreds of times. But I'll never forget the first time we rolled it outside. And we were going to the pad for wet dress. And I remember giving the team the direction and the words were, I'll probably get them messed up a little bit, but it was something like, it's time to bring her outside and let the world have a view.
Cool.
And what a view it was, because that rocket stands 323 feet tall. It sits on a mobile launcher deck that's 50 feet off of the ground. So if you can imagine, and you know, when it rolls past the windows of the Launch Control Center, and there's a picture in that video where I'm kind of peering up, and that is the night of rollout, and it's as that big vehicle rolled out past the windows of the Launch Control Center. So you put it together, you test it, you roll it to the pad. You're going to do a wet dress where you go down late into count. Once it all checks out, then the next thing you're going to do is launch. But it was a first flight, and first flights can be challenging. Anytime you do something for the first time, it can be challenging. And so it took us a couple of runs to get through wet dress. It took us 4 attempts. In fact, I have a little countdown. I say 4 wet dress rehearsals, 3 launch attempts, 2 hurricanes, and 1 tanking test is what it took to get there.
Hurricane, they can even have enough trouble. The wet dress means you were fueled. Is that when you? Okay.
Yes.
So we're fueled, practice, sim, and then hurricane. You had to roll back for the hurricane.
One of them we rolled back for, and one we stayed at the pad for.
Okay. So dealing with the weather, and then what happened?
And then we finally got to our launch attempt on November 16th. Mm-hmm. And I can remember, we had scrubbed the launch attempt. We had an issue with our engine conditioning on one of our RS-25 engines, couldn't verify. And on the second one, we ended up with a hydrogen leak. And so we ended up scrubbing that launch attempt. So we're in the third launch attempt. We'd stayed at the pad. We had a hurricane that had no direct hit to Kennedy, but that had come up the Florida coast. And about 5 days later after that, we got into launch countdown. And I can remember coming in it seems like you're always coming in at night. I don't know why, but I came in and we get into tanking. And we had really struggled through the whole test campaign with different hydrogen leaks. I mean, hydrogen is propulsively, it's a great commodity, but it will leak. Mm-hmm. And so we got into tanking. Everything's going great. It's a very quiet countdown. And I'm starting to think, this might be our night. We get to replenish on the core stage, and I'm listening on one of the back channels, and I hear some talk about a leak at the replenish valve, and the replenish valve is used to top off the tank, the core stage tank. Mm-hmm. And so we ended up having to deploy a team to the pad to go repair that. Got the folks back, get back. We're at T-minus 10 minutes and holding. But on that night, it was a little bit different than the ones that had come before. And while we had done it many, many times in sims, it was the first time that the NASA test director came to me at the T-minus 10-minute hold, which is our last planned hold in the countdown, and said, "Launch Director, NTD, our launch team is ready to proceed. We are working. No constraints." And that's where you see part of that footage in the video, and I say, "Copy that, NTD. At this time, I'll perform my poll for launch." This is the launch director performing the final poll for launch, verify ready to resume count and go for launch. And you heard in that video, we're going through that pole, and we're getting those goes, and then I turn around and make my remarks and give the NTD the direction to pick up the count and launch Artemis I. And I can remember looking up at that countdown clock that sits about right here on the wall above me, and I'm watching that countdown clock, and you hear the ground launch sequencer, the operator, say, the countdown clock will resume on my mark. And the countdown clock starts counting down. We had never been in terminal count with this vehicle before. We'd done it many, many times in sims, but never with the flight hardware, a fully fueled vehicle. And at T-minus 6 minutes, we have no planned holds for the rest of this, but you can hold the clock at 6. And in a sim, you always get a problem somewhere between 10 and 6 because they want to see you hold the clock and work the problem. And I remember looking at that countdown clock, and it seemed like it took forever to get to 6 minutes. And I remember seeing it tick under 6, 5:59. And then about a minute later, you hear the ground launch sequencer operator, which is the only voice over the loop, say, GLS is go for FTS arm. And then a minute later, GLS is go for APU start. APUs start coming up, they're spinning, we start terminating propellants to the vehicle, pressurizing tanks, countdown clock is moving, and we're watching the ground launch sequencer, the LCC violations, what we call the hits page, and it is perfectly clear, and that countdown clock continues to roll. And I remember looking up and seeing it was 1 minute and 30 seconds, and in my lap was a set of 55 cutouts in the launch window where there were little sections of time where if we held the clock that we would end up, we had to wait and make sure we weren't in every milestone. I was flipping those pages over, and I remember we got to 1 minute 30 seconds. We have no hold time remaining, and I took that piece of paper and I kind of tossed it up on the desk, and I looked over at my assistant launch director and I said, not going to need this tonight. And it was a wonderful feeling as we got under 1 minute 30, and we got down in and around T-minus 33 seconds, and you're handing over from the ground to the flight software, and then T-minus 10, and you hear the GLS, the ground launch sequencer operator, again, the only voice in the room. GLS is go for core stage engines start. And we're just a few seconds from being in business here. And then we're down to 6, and you start that stagger start on those RS-25 engines, and then 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, booster ignition and liftoff. And just like that, that moment that we had been waiting for and working toward had finally arrived.
And that was awesome. Thank you for that. And that was the launch of Artemis I.
Yes.
And next comes the launch of Artemis II, which we're looking forward to. So tell us about what you're doing. That's going to be a little, there's a picture here with the team behind 4 people in blue flight suits. That's the Artemis IV crew.
Artemis II.
So I'm sorry. The Artemis II crew, the 4 crew of Artemis II, they're the people going to space.
Yes.
So on this next one, our 4 friends are going to be going. You're going to have the responsibility of launching them. What are you doing to get ready for that? Tell us what that's all about. This is big, folks.
So we're building on what we did for Artemis I. We're taking our launch countdown, the things that work. The framework of the launch is pretty much the same. Of course, we added some time in because we have to get the crew out to the pad. We have to get them strapped in. We have to do those comm checks that you were talking about. And we'll have some additional systems that have to be configured for a crewed flight. And so we are working on that. We have new launch commit criteria. I talked about those go, no-go rules. Well, we have new ones. We've got all the ones we had before, and then we have some new ones associated with the crewed systems. And so we're adding those in. We're updating our software. We're updating our procedures. We're into our training already. We've already started having sims. So can't wait.
Can't wait. And when do you have a launch date? I hate to say that because launch dates always move. But what are we looking at now? Do you have one?
September of 2025. So
September 20.
So about a little over a year away.
A little over a year away. Plenty of work to do. Those are the 4 folks going there. Our friends in the blue suits there. Yeah. So a little over a year from now, that's the plan. Well, and of course, you're only going to go if it's right. We're not going to rush this along, but hopefully and we're going to launch our friends to the moon, and then after that, more stuff.
Yes,
landing and doing other things.
Yes, absolutely. So it's all about adding capability with each of the launches. So the first one was an uncrewed test flight, Artemis I just talked about. Next is we add the crewed systems. We test fly those, and then after that, it is landing on the moon.
Landing on the moon. And when do we think that?
It's about a year after.
After that,
yeah.
Okay. So a lot of exciting stuff. And you're going to hang around for that, aren't you? You're going to be doing that as well? Okay, cool. All right. Well, this is all great. I think we're at about a time where we can look at the, where's our adult supervisor here? Elysia somewhere, I think.
Yep.
So
if anyone has any questions,
yes,
just go ahead and raise your hand, please. Nice and tall.
Yes,
all right,
please.
we got a few. All right. Hold
Please
on
ask whatever you'd like to know. And the microphone's coming towards you.
Coming towards you, right here.
When is gonna be the next passenger, other normal people going traveling to the space?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear the question.
When it's gonna happen, then normal people traveling to the space?
Oh, non-astronaut.
Yes.
Either that, or you're saying astronauts are not normal, which I think based on data can be argued. But no.
So that's a great question. I think we have civilian astronauts that go to space today. There are commercial partners and commercial industry that launch civilian astronauts to space. When will they go to the moon, or when will they go to Mars? That's a great question. I don't have a date for you on that, but I look forward to it because I want to sign up myself.
Okay, sure.
Okay, behind him.
With the advancement of computers, faster processors, we see that right now in the AI industry. How has faster computers affected the launch program?
How have faster computers affected
the launch program?
Oh, absolutely. So if you look back in the history, like if you went back to Apollo, we had about 400. So the same room that you see on this rotator here, photo, is the same one we use for Apollo. Same size. We use it for shuttle, we use it for Apollo, we use it for shuttle, and we use it for Artemis. For Apollo, we had about 400 engineers in that room. And the reason is, if you go back and look at pictures, they're looking at strip chart recorders, and they're looking at like a set of lights. And so it took a lot of people because the technology at the time was not what it is today, right? And so it's really changed. And then if you went and looked at shuttle, and you looked at the computing system that we used, which was probably state of the art in the 1970s, but again, we were still using it at the end of the shuttle program in 2011. If you look at that, when we launched shuttle, we had about 200 individuals in the room, and we could each look at, we had a TV-like screen. It was very advanced. You could push a button and you could flip between 6 pages. We called them 6 concurrencies. So you could flip through that. And then today, it looks very much like the computer systems that you have on your desk, where you can drag multiple displays, color code, alarms, all kinds of things. And so computers and the power of technology can really be seen in the staffing numbers in the room, and then the capability that you have. And I'm going to put Mike on the spot here talking about computers, because we changed out the processor, right, in on one of the Hubble missions, right, with a
on the Hubble.
Yeah.
Yes.
With a 486, right?
Yeah, which is a really old computer, kids. Yeah, like when I was in college, sort of. They had those things. Yeah, so it's amazing what is the difference. And how many people did you say you have in the room now?
About 100.
As opposed to 200.
Yep.
So that's because of the computing power.
Yep.
So, so on Hubble, it was, built, I guess, in the 70s and early 80s, launched. It was supposed to launch it was supposed to launch, I guess, in the early 80s, eventually 1986. Then they had the accident, didn't happen, and then it launched in 1990. But, the computer technology always lags. Mm-hmm. And so that we were dealing with 1970s technology on the shuttle, and about that same on the Hubble. And it was a 486.
Yeah.
Down on 125, we changed out the computer to upgrade it a little bit. And we wouldn't have even done that if it was still working. The only reason we did that is because it broke and it wasn't working any longer. So we were able to put that upgrade in. So the amount of technology we have now available to us has really been quite helpful. The shuttle, like the one we have here, was manually flown. And you took all these buttons and all the rudimentary stuff we had. We had hardly anything in the shuttle to help us. It was these very basic computers and these wacky keyboards that you would put these entries in. It was not a normal way to operate like you would think of today. And it required so much training, not only to do the stuff you were going to do, but for the stuff you weren't going to do. Because you had to do all the stuff that a computer would do nowadays because it was such an old vehicle. So you had to handle all the emergencies. And you mentioned what you trained for in the sims was all the emergencies. That's what we trained for too. The actual launch day was nothing really typically happened, maybe one or two little things. But the sims were punishing. You had to work all this stuff, and it was all people doing it. I guess the control room without too much help, and then us on board without any help. I asked the pilot, Digger, Dwayne Carey, for my first flight, how much of his training as a pilot did he not use in space? And he said 99.9999% of it he did not use. He trained for years for stuff that he was never going to use because everything went okay. Now it's completely different. The training flow for the new astronauts coming in, they don't even train them on the vehicle until they get assigned. And it's just a couple weeks of learning how the vehicle operates because it's automated. The SpaceX Dragon and these other vehicles are highly automated. So it's allowed more people to go. It's cut down the training. It's not like they have nothing to do. They're able to concentrate on other things, and it's made things a lot safer. So.
When you think about the data, too, like for shuttle, we had 128 kilobits of data coming off of that shuttle, 128 kilobits. And that was for the entire vehicle. And so you think about, how much data you have today with your phone, it's just, it's incredible.
And we're also kind of reminiscing about Apollo a little bit here at the museum. They had even less back then, which is quite astounding.
So technology has played a huge role.
All right, over here.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. This was super interesting. I'm just curious, I know this is probably a long ways away, but what needs to happen or what sort of capabilities need to be built or developed in order to proceed on to Mars?
Capabilities for going on to Mars?
Yeah, like what needs to happen before we can do that?
Well, there's quite a few of them, right? We want to build on what we learned from the moons. You think about if you think about going to the International Space Station, Mike and I were talking about this a little bit earlier. You think about going to the International Space Station, it's hours to a day, right, to get there. Think about going to the moon, it's multiple days to get there. You think about going to Mars, and it's months to a year to get there. And so one of the things that the moon provides us an opportunity for is to learn how to live independently away from our home planet. And to take those things that we learn and the challenges that we find along the way and how we solve them and apply them to Mars. Because you think about communicating between Earth and Mars and what that lag time would be. You think about the kind of systems that you're going to need to create habitats, to create an environment that you can live and you can sustain life on Mars. And so there's a tremendous amount of development both in how you sustain life there, how you land there, and I think the moon is a great proving ground for us And of course, we also have the rovers that are on Mars today that give us so much information that we've never had before. And they've been there for a long time, and they're still discovering. I mean, I was just reading in the airport today about some discoveries from when they had rolled over some of the rocks there, and some of the discoveries that we're making all these years later to help us understand the Martian surface.
Okay, here's second row.
Hi, Charlie. Thanks for being here. Kind of you. We're really enjoying this. My question is more philosophical, and maybe you can shed some light. Considering how astronomically expensive and how dangerous space is, why do we keep doing this as humans? Why do we go above and beyond what we need to do as humans, as the human race, when a lot of this money, perhaps, or perhaps these souls that we're taking risks with are better off on Earth, perhaps? But why do we keep doing this? Again, philosophically speaking, what do you think?
Philosophically, I think we're called to explore. I think we are called to understand what we don't know. I think that is part of how our country was formed, and it has always been part of our DNA, if you will, is to understand what lies beyond what I can see and what I currently know. And I think we're called to that. In terms of cost, if you look at NASA's part of the federal budget, it's a very small amount, like 0.5 of 1%. And if you look at all that NASA does with that 0.5 of 1%, it's pretty amazing. And there's also an investment that comes with that, because when the budget that NASA gets, it actually turns around, and you see that in the local economies. You see that in the businesses and the partners that you have that support NASA and their mission. So philosophically, why do I think we go into space? I think we go because we want to know. We want to know what lies beyond. We want to know what the Martian surface looks like. We want to know, the mysteries of our universe and what we can learn by studying the moon.
That's good.
That's a great answer. Okay, over here on the left. Your left.
How does it feel to be the first female launch director at NASA?
How does it feel to be the first
female, what was it?
The first female launch director at NASA.
Oh, first female launch director at NASA. That's always a tough question for me. It's not something that I think about every day, I mean, I think I'm the launch director, and it's about taking care, making sure we're ready to go launch, making sure that it's safe for the crews. It's about making sure that we're doing all the things as a team that we can do to be ready for that moment and to be ready for that launch. But I know that I am the first woman to have this job. And, sometimes I have someone that will tell me what it means to them, that seeing a woman in this role demonstrates that firing room, and I hope it does, right? I hope that me standing at the front of the room and being the launch director sends a message to every woman, every young girl that sees that says, I can do that. I can do whatever I want. There is nothing that is closed off to me. If it is part of that message, then I'm just really proud to be a part of that.
Awesome.
Hey, other questions?
Hi, I was curious. So, since you've been there so long and kind of, seen the old program and the new, with the technology in terms of, what I was asking was that as the technology's improved, but the pieces have gotten a lot more complicated, do you find that, in the launch sequence and as you guys do the dress rehearsals and all that, have you found that things have gotten more streamlined, or is the more complicated process and parts and all that kind of outweighing how quickly we can develop test procedures and all that? Like, how's that going?
So how does the technology, and I want to make sure I got your question right. So is the question, does it help or does it?
Are the systems getting more complicated faster? Are the systems getting more complicated faster than our ability to monitor them and test them and do all that?
So I don't think, at least in the control center, I wouldn't say that they're more complicated than we can monitor, but certainly there's a lot more data, and a lot more data is in many ways, a real blessing, because it really helps you to understand, especially on your first flights, right? It helps you understand the environments of launch. It helps you understand the environments of space. That extra data is really important. But you are correct, right? Today, we talked about 128 kilobits of data that came off the shuttle. We talk about how much data we have on our phones. We talk about, the amount of instrumentation that we have on rockets today is entirely different than what we had available to us in Apollo and shuttle. And so that does have some complexity in terms of the command and control systems. I mean, I remember when we were looking at the deployment of our first sets of software, and we were talking about the amount of changes that we had to be able to track in the control center, and we said we might have up to 500. We need to be able to have 500 changes per second, and we need to make sure that our control center can track to that. And that was nothing that we'd ever had to think about to that level for a shuttle vehicle. And so you're right, the complexities that come with that, or the extra data that you get, it's a great thing, because you get a better understanding, you have more insight, you can monitor more things, but it does drive some complexities within your control center. Now, we haven't got to the point where we don't feel like we can't keep up, but it certainly does drive some complexities.
Okay, back here.
Hi, I guess I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but what are your thoughts on Starship and it being part of Artemis?
So Starship is part of Artemis. It is our lander for the moon. When in this NASA enterprise, it is a group of international partners and commercial partners, and I think that's absolutely wonderful. Our deputy administrator, Pam Melroy, she quotes, and I forget the source of this, but it says, if you want to go fast, you go alone. If you want to go far, you go together. And so, we are going together, and it is cooperation between NASA, between our international partners, and commercial industry.
Okay, right in front of him.
Hey, this has been amazing. It's super interesting. Thank you. I had a follow-up from an earlier question. You mentioned that technology is delayed, and gave the example about 1970s technology going for a 1990s launch. Why is there such a delay for upgrading computer systems and that technology in NASA?
Well, I'll take part of this, Mike, and then you can talk about it as well. Part of it is linked to how long it takes to go from idea, from paper, to production, to deployment, to ready to go fly. And because you have to be ready for the different environments of space, then there's a suite of tests that you have to do. Your design happens at one time, and then you fly in another. And so there is some amount of delay. Even with a streamlined development, there's going to be some delay between, not delay, but some time that elapses between when you first came up with the idea, when you first came up with the design, and so that design is reflective of the time in which it was created. And I think it's really about how long it takes to go produce a spacecraft or a launch control system. And then once you have something that's working, you want to be careful. It doesn't mean you don't ever want to upgrade it, but it means you want to be careful in the way in which you do your upgrades, because if you have something that's working, you don't want to introduce something that may not. And so there's that deliberate nature about upgrades as well.
Yeah, I think too, like some of these, like the shuttle, for example, was 70s technology. We didn't have personal computers back then, right? And so it was all these like mainframe so these were new. This was the latest thing available. And as Charlie said, once it worked and it was rated so people could be on board, you didn't want to change too much of that. But interestingly enough, about the time that I arrived at NASA, I was in the astronaut class of 1996, we started using PCs on board. At first they were these like not very good ones that were used like in the battlefield. There were these grid computers. and then it turned into more modern, like you might have like an IBM laptop is what we changed to. I'm not sure what they're using now. But once we got that, then it's easier to change those things out. And we started putting more and more capability, even in the shuttle, on laptop computers. And the space station is pretty much all laptops up there. Some of them are for the system software, and some are for things that are not as critical, like other things to help you with. And that I thought was a clever idea, because you can swap out a laptop. You're not going to do it every year even, but you'll do it every couple of years. You'll upgrade that and stay pretty current. So like the internet, we used to do like mail syncs on the shuttle, and in the beginning days of the space station, where you 2 times a day they could have a morning mail sync, and all the stuff would go up, it'll go down to the ground, all your stuff would come up, and then at night it would go down again and come up. And then we went to like an instantaneous internet thing, which was pretty slow, like the old sort of dial-up thing was going, and now it's really quick. Now, so because they've been able to, they lag a little bit, but now by using things like personal computers, cameras they can get pretty good cameras on there because they can change them out. So I think it was just because you couldn't change it. Once you built it and it worked, you weren't going to go pull out the computers on the space shuttle. But nowadays, I think it's a little more state of the art that we're able to use. I don't know what they have on Orion. Probably that is. Like that stuff, probably not that easy to change out, I would think. I don't know if they're probably using PCs.
The flight computers themselves, I mean, you have to go through all of the testing, the qualification, all of that. But I mean, it is a glass cockpit look to it, so it has a state-of-the-art look. Yeah,
so it's but 20 years from now, they may say, "Oh, look at that old stuff these people use."
Well,
what is that? But it's pretty cool looking right now.
All right, and our last question right on over here.
Thank you so much for all the wonderful answers so far. On a lighter note, what are your top 3 favorite space-related Hollywood movies, and which movie do you think got, not in particular within those movies, but just across Hollywood movies, which movie do you think got the science pretty much right?
So what are my top 3?
Favorite space-related movies?
Space movies. I love Apollo 13. That's one of my favorites. I love The Martian. I think that's a great space movie as well. I'm sure I'm forgetting something as well. What about you, Mike? What's your...
Oh, we were talking about... My favorite movie of all time is The Right Stuff. That came out in 1983, and it re-inspired me to want to get involved with the space program. I was a senior in college, going into my senior year in college. So that is based on a book by Tom Wolfe. So I really like that. It was about the original astronauts and the test pilots before them. That's my favorite movie. I've seen that more than any movie ever. I was quoting The Right Stuff when you were talking to us, but not to my, to my crewmates, retro jettison switch, whatever. And we screw around with that all the time. Anyway, so The Right Stuff's my favorite. Apollo 13 is one of my favorites because I think it shows the dedication of the Mission Control Center and how important it was for people on Charlie's team and the team that we had in Houston to make sure the crew is going to be okay, and there was, failure's not an option, and how dedicated and involved and passionate they were about the program, more so, or as much so, or if not more than the astronauts were, and I think that depicted that relationship really well. And then the other one, we were talking about earlier with some of my friends, is First Man. I really love that movie. It shows, I think, the seriousness of the job, and it shows what Neil Armstrong was really like, and I think captures a lot of the of what it was like to go to the scenes of the landing on the moon. So those are my top 3. Did you come up with a third as we're talking here?
No, I didn't.
But anyway, those are 2. Those are The Martian, though.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good one.
Hey,
I like all the space movies. As long as the astronaut looks cool in the movie, I'm okay with it. As far as like it being accurate, it doesn't matter. As long as the astronaut looks cool. That's the way I judge it. So.
That's a great plug for tonight too. If anyone wants to watch First Man, we happen to be showing it on the flight deck when the sun goes down.
Great
movie. I actually have one more question. My friend over here with the sparkly glove needs to ask a question.
So how is the newest telescope, the Roman Space Telescope, been going on the building?
How's the process on the Roman telescope, the Nancy Grace Roman telescope? The new telescope.
The Roman? I don't know about that. Maybe the Webb telescope you're thinking of, or
the new one after Webb that they're building right now.
Oh, what do they call that one?
Nancy Grace Roman.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Smart.
Yeah.
We need him at NASA.
That's right.
Get this kid an application. Go ahead. What are you doing?
I don't have any direct involvement with that, so I don't have any good insider information to share on that.
Yeah, I don't have anything, but the Webb telescope is the next. There's a lot of telescopes, and we're going to still use the ones that are on Earth. Just because we have ones in space, we still use the ones on Earth. There's plenty of things we can look at. Hubble, even though it's been 30, how long has it been? It's launched in 1990, so 34 years coming up, and it's still working. We don't warranty the labor though, but it's still working, and hopefully will continue for many years. And James Webb has been up there for a couple of years now, trying to look at the origins of the universe and life on other planets. So I can just imagine this next one. I think is going to be pretty special. The more powerful instruments we can get in the hands of the astronomers, the more we're going to learn about what's out there, and is there anyone else out there, and where we came from, and so on. So I'm very excited about this next one.
All right. Well, everyone, put your hands together one more time for Charlie Blackwell-Thompson and Mike Massimino. Thank you both so much for being here tonight. Also, thank you, everyone, tuning in from home as well. We also would like to thank, of course, the NASA Space Grant Consortium for supporting our show. And lastly, a special shout out and thank you to our American Sign Language interpreters who have been here all night as well. So everyone, don't forget, if you haven't already, head up to the Space Shuttle Pavilion. Check out our new exhibit, Apollo When We Went to the Moon. It's our largest ever temporary exhibit, co-produced by the U.S. Space and Rocket Center and Flying Fish. Also, be sure to head up to the flight deck later. Thank you for the plug, Mike, to see First Man, one of his favorites. It should be one of yours as well, for our summer movie night. And for those of you tuning in from home, don't go anywhere. We are going to be having a little quick one-on-one with Charlie, so we're going to answer some of your questions up there. Just give us a couple minutes to get up there, and thank you all so much for coming. Have a great rest of your night.
All right, folks, if you're watching at home, give us just a couple minutes here. We're not quite done. We're going to have our very own Elysia Segal back up here speaking one-on-one with Charlie Blackwell-Thompson. And there were some questions that came in from the chat that we didn't get a chance to ask there. So we've got another 15 minutes where we'll get some of your specific questions from the internet. Elysia Segal sitting down with Charlie. Just give us a couple minutes to move up here to our spot, and we will be right back.
All right, so welcome back, everyone. Thank you for hanging with us. We are up here now with Charlie Blackwell-Thompson one-on-one. We're going to get a chance to answer some of your questions at home. Thank you so much again for being here.
You're welcome.
You really are an inspiration. I mean, for so many people, women, young people, and as we were trying to come over here, she was getting swamped. So many people were asking for autographs and pictures. You really are a celebrity around here, among space fans at least. But I actually kind of wanted to speak to that a little bit. Earlier, you got a chance to talk to our Techs of Tomorrow youth. So it's a high school program that we've been doing for teenage girls in high school. It's kind of a career ladder program, and so she was very gracious to talk to them a bit, answer some of their questions. And you mentioned seeing that picture of Joanne Morgan in the firing room for Apollo. Could you just kind of speak about how that inspired you and your journey through this course of what you're doing now? How when you started off, maybe you didn't see so many women also in it, but now how things have changed.
Yeah, so when we launched Apollo 11 over 55 years ago, there was one woman in the firing room, one out of 450 engineers, and her name is Joanne Morgan. And so when you look through the footage and you look through those photos, it's actually even hard to see her in this sea of men. And I, of course, met Joanne later in my career, but I was always intrigued with her story, and I was always indebted to her. Even though she didn't know me, I was indebted to her for showing me and all the other women at Kennedy that we did have a place in that firing room. And so I'm so blessed. So Joanne, if you're out there, hello. I keep in touch with her today. And I recently did an event called Women Launching Women as part of Women's History Month. And you wrote a note to someone that had inspired you or had impacted you. And one of my notes, I had a whole bunch that I wrote, but one of them was to Joanne. And because she did have such a profound effect on me. So I'll always feel a debt of gratitude to her.
And as you said, as you've kind of climbed the ranks and gotten a little more involved, you're seeing now more and more women in there.
Oh, it has completely changed. I mean, I think about Joanne, one out of 450 engineers, one woman. And then you contrast that with shuttle, where we had about 10% women in the firing room on launch day. So you had, 200 engineers in the room. You had, 20 women. And then now with Artemis, we're somewhere in about the 25%. So it has absolutely changed. I mean, we still got work to do, but we've absolutely changed. And one of the things that I love, we do this every year during Women's History Month, is we kind of spread the word, and we have the women of launch control, and we take a photo. And I love to see all of the women, and especially the young women that are part of our team that come out for that, and just the reflection of, the society that we live in, and I see the reflection of that in our team, and especially in our young women that I get to at least go visit with and be a part of this Women's History Month event.
One of the things during, or right after, I suppose, the Artemis launch that really stuck out to me that I thought was so odd but so funny and really touching, but also kind of like, was the tie cutting ceremony that you all have. Now, as you mentioned previously, it was all men. Men are, wearing their ties. You wore a tie in the firing room there, and you actually had your tie cut. Can you talk a little bit about that tradition, your thoughts on that tradition as a woman now, and other weird little customs or superstitions you guys have?
Absolutely. So it does go back, I'm sure, to the firing room being primarily filled with men. And one of the traditions is that when you sat in a position for launch for the very first time, you get your tie cut. And I did wear a tie for launch. I'm a big tradition holder. You don't have to wear a tie. That's the beautiful thing is that, I cut scarves, I cut ties, I cut, whatever. If folks wore something and they wanted that symbolism of, I've sat in the control room and I have this thing. And so for me, wearing the tie was part of the kind of the tradition, but I wanted it to also be maybe more reflective of my personality. And then I had Mike Leinbach and Bob Seek cut the tie for me, because Mike was the launch director at the end of the shuttle program, and Bob Seek is a legend in launch ops. He's a launch director for shuttle for a very long time, and I just thought it was so appropriate for, to have them come back. It's 01, well, by this time it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, so it's not a daytime launch, and they both, weathered through the launch attempts and were gracious enough to cut my tie for me.
Are there any other customs or superstitions in the firing room like that? I've heard like the green nail polish and stuff like that.
There is traditions in the firing room, and it probably varies. Some of them vary by team and individuals. Yeah, I paint my nails green for launch. I'm green for go. That's a big thing for me. And then you'll notice, like tonight, I have on these green bracelets. So what I do is, these are my all-in bracelets, and so at the beginning of the campaign, I put a green bracelet on, and that's the symbol to me. It's my symbol to myself that I'm all in, and it is the symbol to my team that I'm all in. And so it's a commitment every day. When I slide it over my wrist, they're not very expensive, but they're very valuable to me. And then, when we run into challenges, it may be a problem we got to go solve, I'll slide another one on, and that's my way of saying, hey, I'm in this with you. We're not giving up. We're pressing forward. And so when we got to the Artemis I launch, I had 8 of them on.
I was going to say, the fewer the bracelets, the better, I guess, at the end of the day. Oh my gosh. So, we see these photos of you in the firing room. You're there at your computer, you're facing like your team and everything, and everyone's facing away. And I always thought, you have this window behind you. You can turn around, you can look out the window, see your rocket out there. When it actually launches, do you have to be facing your computer, I assume? You're checking on everyone. Is that so hard to not turn around and just want to see this thing go up in a blaze of glory?
Well, the great thing is, as we get down into the final seconds of count, I am absolutely watching the screen in front of me and watching the countdown clock, and very focused on the data and the voice loops if there's a call. But as we get down to T0 and we have booster ignition and liftoff, I do turn around and look out the window. And I can do that for a couple of reasons. One is that we hand off to Houston. We get to launch, we hand off to Houston. I'm still interested in what the data is saying, but I absolutely want to see that vehicle come off the pad.
Absolutely. And what was that like to see Artemis I finally lift off the pad? A little quicker, I think, than we were expecting. It's very powerful.
It definitely comes off the pad at a very nice rate. It was, for me, I don't remember the specifics of like how quick that happened, but I do remember like the almost like emotional response to it, where you turn around and you're watching out the window. And of course, it was a night where we had a lot of humidity, so there was some condensation on the windows, which made it a little bit difficult. But I remember, facing out and just looking at the milestones of the plus count, and knowing that at about 2 minutes we're going to drop the boosters, and at 8 minutes we're going to cut off and separate core stage, and just waiting for those mission milestones and that anticipation, and as the countdown clock is moving, even though our Houston flight directors have control of the vehicle, but you are so invested in that mission. So I remember that, and then of course there's that sound and that pressure wave that comes off of the pad, and the windows of the LCC begin to shake a little bit and rattle. And on Artemis I launch night, I could actually feel the floor of the LCC underneath me, and it was so there's a physical response to that as well.
Yeah, at Kennedy Space Center they have kind of a launch experience like that for the Apollo mission, and I remember they shake the floor, they shake the windows, and I was always wondering, is it still like that, even with the sound suppression system and everything? But no, it's a big one, so it definitely does that. So some questions from the audience now at home. What's it like when there is a last-minute scrub or an auto abort? So you're polling everyone, you're up there, everyone obviously is all in and everything. What's that like to have a scrub or an auto abort?
So one of the things that is great about our training is that you repeat things over and over and over, and in training, the team very rarely lets you launch. I mean, they give you a cutoff that's late and count. You go through all of your safing sequences. You get the vehicle. You start draining propellants, and that's part of our training as well. You always, you want to launch, but in terms of like it's almost like that muscle memory. Now there's certainly a disappointment for you're gearing up for this launch, but you want to launch. You have to launch when it's safe to do so. Of course. And so it's a little bit of. It's almost, I don't want to say it's like a sim, but because you train that so much in the sim, it's kind of the muscle memory just kicks in.
Yeah, and there were a couple of those that you had to go through with Artemis, unfortunately. As a kid, so you spoke earlier again, that, saying that you were an engineer, went to Clemson, I believe you said. When you were
Tigers, any Tigers out there?
When you were a kid, did you want to be an engineer, or what did you want to be? And did you ever launch like hobby rockets? Were you ever into rocketry and whatnot? I don't know that when I was a kid, that I wanted to be an engineer, because it wasn't really till high school that I had that teacher that gave me that gentle nudge. But I was always that curious kid that wanted to know, why not? Why can't you do it? Well, and so I always had lots of questions. And so I think that is an attribute of an engineer. I just didn't know it at the time. So growing up, it'll probably be funny to you or funny to the audience, but when I was growing up, I actually wanted to work for the Dallas Cowboys. When I was a kid, I've always loved team sports, and I've always loved football, and I thought, they were, when I was in my youth, they were America's team. That was their brand, and I was like, I want to work for America's team. And guess what? Now you are.
As it turns out, I got the opportunity, just America's space team.
Teamwork is such a big part of it, though. You also mentioned earlier you liken your job to being like an orchestra director.
Yes, or a coach. Yeah. I really do, because it is, and I talk about it being a team sport. I mean, launch ops is a team sport. Everybody has to bring their best game. We depend on each other to each play our role and to do it well. And it takes all of us working together. It's not just about the launch director or, one particular, individual on the team. It's about how we all play together on game day.
And you've been doing this for a while, so, as you were talking with Mike during the shuttle program and also now into Artemis. So one of these questions was, how much did the lessons learned from shuttle play into things like the countdown for SLS, the experience with the ground umbilical carrier plate that was a challenge later in the shuttle era, that sort of thing? How much of that was learned there and carried over?
We have a tremendous amount of lessons that were taken forward from shuttle. Our countdown, we have a lot of the same systems. You have solid rocket boosters. Yes, we have an extra segment there. Yes, we have an extra engine that we had from shuttle, but the engine, the RS-25s are essentially the same. So we took a lot from the shuttle countdown and a lot from the lessons learned. And I was lucky enough to have been a part of the program till the end, and the program itself was very good about capturing lessons learned, best practices, and we rolled those things into the Artemis launch plan.
So with the Artemis program, obviously the Artemis Apollo connection, the name of that. Somebody was asking, what do you think the Mars missions will be called? Do you have any idea?
I have no idea, but I can't wait to see what that would be, and I can't wait to see what our Artemis generation would propose for that.
Oh, nice. Do you hope to still be launch directing during the Mars missions?
I think the Mars mission may be a little bit beyond, beyond my career. But I tell you what, whether I'm still working in that time frame, I can tell you this, I can guarantee you this, I will be a huge champion for it. I'll be a big cheerleader for that Mars campaign, and I can't wait. So Artemis generation, let's go do it.
And so to round out the questions here then also, speaking of the Artemis generation, do you have any advice for someone who might be interested in working at NASA, male or female, but just any tips for somebody who might be interested in doing
Absolutely. I would say check out the NASA website, nasa.gov. There are intern opportunities that come out once a year, the calls for those. I would say reach out to folks that you know if you have questions about it, about working for NASA, about what are all the things that NASA has to offer, because it's not just one particular field. I mean, someone today was asking, well, do you have to be an engineer? And the answer is, well, there's a lot of us engineers there, but NASA has all different fields represented. I mean, you can't name something that you don't need as part of the team somewhere. And so I would say in terms of working for NASA, look at the NASA website, look at and it'll have links, and we can get some, and you can actually post them if you'd like, specifically for resources about working for NASA. And it doesn't just have to be NASA civil servant either. It can also be the contractor workforce.
So there you have it. If you are interested in working for NASA, it's not that hard. And there are really so many different positions. I know we have Kids Week, this big event that we have in February every year, and we actually had artists from JPL here. Joby, the guy whose cat was the laser thing, he was here too. But there are so many different jobs: communicators, artists, electricians, computer programmers, all kinds of different things.
Business, PAO.
Business. If you like spreadsheets, see, there's a job for you. Well, thank you so much again, Charlie, for being here. This has been phenomenal. We've really run you through the ringer here. We did so many things. We took her up to the exhibit. We took her down to the RS-25 engine downstairs. So many things. But thank you so much for being here. This has been absolutely
It's
inspiring.
been a wonderful afternoon and a wonderful evening. Thank you for having me.
Of course. And everyone at home, thank you guys for tuning in. Of course, Astro Live is supported through a NASA cooperative agreement awarded to the New York Space Grant Consortium, so thank you so much for that. And also come to the Intrepid. Hey, we still have the exhibit going on in the Space Shuttle Pavilion through September 2nd. We've also got the RS-25 engine, which perhaps you got a sneak peek of earlier if you were tuning into the Flame Trench. Downstairs, that's also going to be here through September as well. It is a real RS-25 engine. It never went into space, but it was used for testing, so it's really cool and really big. And of course, don't forget to tune in next month. We are going to be having our next Astro Live virtual, and we're going to be talking all about the RS-25 engine. We'll have some people from Aerojet Rocketdyne on with us talking about shuttle-era RS-25s and now Artemis-era RS-25s. So, without further ado, I'm going to wrap it up, but thank you so much again for being here. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you, Das, and everyone. My goodness, there's so many people up here now. We have a lot of behind-the-scenes crew, our ASL interpreters, of course, Mike Massimino, everyone here at the Intrepid. It's just a big love fest. But thank you all for coming to tune in. Thank you for being here. And as Das would say, we'll see you nerds later.
And here we go.
We have liftoff. Propulsion continues to be nominal.
RS-68 chamber pressure looks good.
Following up. Roger, roger, Atlantic. Water towers fly! Yes! Tango down to nominal.
Sliding down to IFD off.
Bring in FD off.
It's orange!
RS-25! Oh my god! Oh my god!
Decollage.
What is it?
Put that in the big bag,
343 unfolds to go.
Indeed. We rise together, back to the moon and beyond.
If the methane would be igniting in the flare, correct?